There are two books which people are always debating as to which one of them describes the worst possible future. 1984 by George Orwell or Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. But what if I told you that Huxley also wrote books about religion and mysticism, and one of them, written in 1940s Britain, was the perennial philosophy. In previous episodes, we've seen how the perennial philosophy, or Philosophia Perennis, was used by Christian theologians to show how Christianity was not just at the core of true religion, but even at the core of ancient wisdom traditions. But what is an English-born writer in the 1950s and 60s doing with perennialism? In the late 1920s, Huxley met the philosopher and broadcaster Gerald Heard, who introduced Huxley to Vedanta. Vedanta is a form of Hindu philosophy which was largely popularized in the West by the Hindu mystic Ramakrishna. Now, Vedanta is much more complex than the aspects I'm going to highlight today. However, Ramakrishna held to a form of Vedanta that emphasized the spiritual truth of all religious traditions. Ramakrishna was known to have practiced everything from Hinduism to Christianity to Islam. And so, the West, through Ramakrishna, was exposed to a very universalist, perennial form of Vedanta. Through this line of inspiration that I'm heavily summarizing, Huxley went on to write the introduction to a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, one of the core tenets of Hindu philosophy. Then, in 1945, after the Second World War, he produced the perennial philosophy. Huxley writes in his introduction to the perennial philosophy, quote, "The perennial philosophy is primarily concerned with the one divine reality substantial to the manifold world of things and lives and minds. But the nature of this one reality is such that it cannot be directly and immediately apprehended except by those who have chosen to fulfill certain conditions." In other words, for Huxley, perennialism cannot be understood at a surface level of the world religions. It needs to be uncovered from the mystical depths. Reading through Huxley's work, you'll find quotes by Zen Buddhists, Christian mystics, Islamic Sufis, Hindu philosophers, the whole ordeal. What I want to highlight here is that Huxley is going to contribute a very specific move in this general view of spirituality and religion, the turn to experience. Perennialism is going to be highly associated with mysticism, and mysticism is going to be highly associated with the inner experience. This was not always the case for religious traditions, which still associated mysticism with a form of practice and ritual. And what would you expect from someone who, during his final dying moments from oral cancer, he asked to be administered LSD? I mean, one of Huxley's other books, The Doors of Perception, ended up inspiring the band name for The Doors themselves. In the upcoming episodes, we'll be looking at how this contribution by Huxley is going to massively inspire the religious and spiritual revolutions of the 1960s onwards in what we would term something like the New Age. We will also be looking at what other contributions were made by thinkers such as William James and the famous Carl Gustav Jung. Thank you for watching another episode of TeaSoteric, and I hope you join me for the journey as fellow riders on the storm.